Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna drink till the day that I die.
Hello and welcome to the video. Today I've got something quite special to share with you. This is a technique that's been used by breweries for a very long time, and I believe that it's time that us homebrewers started doing some of this too. So I'm going to start off now by describing the technique, and then after I've done that I'm actually going to brew it and show you how it all goes. Split wort brewing is not a new concept at all. In fact, this has been used in brewing since, well, almost the beginning of commercial brewing, and maybe before that even. This type of brewing can take many different forms. One early method would be that the brewery would produce just one type of wort. This wort would be highly concentrated, and varying different levels of extra water would be added depending on the desired beer. One very early example of this would have been the one wort method for making a brown porter, and then there would be a highly watered down version that would become a brown ale. Many of the techniques that have been developed over the years have stayed with commercial brewing up until the present day. Naturally, there has been a fair amount of development in all these years though, and the techniques that are used now are far superior to what was used back in the early times. If you're new to this technique as a concept, then you may be thinking that this produces an inferior beer. In actual fact it doesn't, and you will find that a lot of very popular beers these days at one point or even today are produced in this manner, so don't let this persuade you that it's a bad technique. Quite the opposite. So you may be asking now, how can you apply this to your Grainfather brewing? Well, give me a moment and I'll explain. Here's the basis of what our recipe will be for this type of brewing. You will notice that the main malts here are Pale Ale and Pilsner. This helps give the recipe a lot of flexibility. The other malts that you see here also offer the same thing, and you'll also see that we have set the original gravity here of 1050. We have 25 IBUs of bittering, and I would recommend warrior hops for this because they're very neutral and have a nice bitterness to them. And then 10 minutes addition of Hallertau, which is a very generic hop. After that we have a 90-minute boil, which is what's recommended considering the amount of Pilsner in here, but some people will decide just to keep it to 60 minutes. That's at your own risk. The mashing schedule when you do something like this will generally vary depending on what type of result you're looking at from the beers that you're going to produce. Naturally, with any brewing system we have a limitation on the amount of beer that we can brew at one time. I personally will go for a batch of 25 litres with a view to splitting it into two different beers. By going with the recipe that you see here, you may be surprised at how many different styles of beer that we can make. Okay, I guess this may have been a surprise to some of you. Bear with me though, I'm going to explain all now. Okay, so there's an old saying that we have, and that is that brewers make wort, but yeast makes beer. And yeast is one of the biggest contributors to any beer style. The other thing to point out is there's an awful lot you can do to change the taste of a beer when it comes to adding extras during fermentation. Some of the extras that I'm going to talk about usually you would probably see added during a boil when a normal home brew is taking place. But this doesn't have to be so, and they can be added during the fermentation phase without any issue at all. So here's our recipe for a 25 litre batch. This recipe will be repeated in the YouTube description, and I will also include imperial measurements for that one too. This is the recipe that I'd recommend to people. Having said that, say for example you're someone who really only likes beer that's very bitter, then you might want to up this somewhat. Say for example you're someone who doesn't like the taste of chocolate malts, again you might want to change that. But again, you know, you need to keep things in keeping with the beer styles. This recipe is quite a typical generic recipe. It's not something that I invented. This has been used all over the world. So let's look at the first 4 of our 8 different beer styles that we can make with this recipe. Like the main recipe itself, I will repeat all of this information in the YouTube description. So let's kick off here with the American Amber Ale. I personally would recommend that you do 12.5 litres of this by splitting the wort directly in half. But say for example there's one of these beers that you'd like a lot more of than the other, then feel free to split it how you wish. In keeping with an American Amber Ale, we need to use the right type of yeast. So this would be a very neutral yeast. Mangrove Jack's M44 or Fermentis US-05 would be perfect for this. To put the American Amber more into style, we need to add some hops, and this can be done with some light dry hopping for up to the last 5 days of the time you have this in the fermentation vessel. Next we have a Belgian Pale Ale and also a Belgian Abbey Ale. These two share a lot of common. They both need obviously Belgian yeast. One is going to use clear candy sugar, which is added just after fermentation has started to wane, and the other one a dark candy sugar, which will obviously give the beer a different flavour. You will also be adding some spices here, and all of these ingredients will need to be boiled for at least 5 minutes. Don't need to go much more than that, and then cooled before adding to the fermentation vessel. When using candy sugar in this way, we always see an increase of gravity, and this will be no different for both of these types of beers. You will notice that once you've added the dark candy sugar, the colour of the beer will change considerably. The last one we see here, the Vienna Lager, simply needs a different type of yeast. This will obviously be a German lager yeast, and of course it will be fermented at a very different temperature to most of the other beers here. Next up on our styles list here is the Californian Common. Here you would use Californian Common specific yeast or any steam beer yeast to get the effect that you want. The other thing to do here on this particular one is to do a 2 to 3 day dry hop before you bottle this. This will also make a very nice Irish red ale, and again the only thing you need to do with this one is just add a different yeast. Next on the list here I've got an English mild ale. This would obviously use an English ale yeast. You would need to add some extra water to this, which will lower the alcohol and obviously give you a higher volume of beer. This is not something to steer clear of. Do make sure the water that you add you pre-boil and cool. This then will be added to your wort. Make sure you have the correct temperature and then pitch your yeast. And last but certainly not least, you can make your own IPA from this. The grain bill that we have here will certainly make a very interesting version of the IPA, and all you're going to do really to determine the style here is add hops from the different countries' IPA that you're looking to brew. So say for example you want to go American, just use American hops. My recommendation would be that you would add 2 different types of hops, and of course if you want to do a layered dry hopping schedule on here, then this would work very well for this. So you might decide that you would start on day 5 adding a couple of different hops, and then on day 4 add a couple more additions of the same, and repeat as necessary. You can make an incredibly hoppy beer just by doing this. Okay, so onto my brew now, and what I decided I would do is brew 1 American Amber Ale and 1 Belgian Abbey Ale from mine, 12.5 litres of each. In the interest of keeping this video at an acceptable length, I've decided not to go into full detail like I would normally do in the other brewing videos that I've done. I will, however, raise some of the topics that I feel are the most important. To get the right level of efficiency in any brewing system, it's important that you mill accordingly. With a Grainfather, you can go pretty fine before you'll have any sparge problems, and they're usually very easily solved. When you add your grain to your strike water, make sure you stir it in very thoroughly and introduce it gradually. For this split wort brew, I decided to do 65 degrees C for 16 minutes and mash out at 75 for 10. You can decide on your own mash schedule depending on what sort of result that you're looking for. The 2 most important things when brewing are cleanliness and sanitization. Do not skimp on these. and you will find that you will have successful brews time after time after time. When sparging, it's important to sparge slowly and evenly. Not only will this increase your efficiency, but it's also a good link to a good tasting beer. To bag up your grain very easily after it's been used, simply put a bag over the top of your grain basket and then flip it over into a spare bucket. During the boiling process, it's important to stir the protein into your beer. Stir after adding every boil addition. At the end of the brew, ensure that you do a whirlpool for at least 5 minutes and let it rest for another 5 minutes. This will allow you to add as many hops as you like without issues with your pump. Without organisation, all we have is chaos. Organise everything for your boil before you reach the boil. Put the different items that you're going to add in order of turn and mark them according to when they're going to be added. Always splash your wort into your fermenter to keep your yeast happy. They thrive on the oxygen that this will produce. During fermentation, it's absolutely imperative that you have good temperature control. Yeast health benefits greatly from a stable temperature. I'm very happy to be able to say that everything went very well with this particular brew. As you can see here, we've got a nice wort, and I managed to beat the target gravity by some points there. So I've now got 2 different fermenters from the same wort, and of course they've both had different yeast, and during the process of fermentation they will actually get different treatment and become very different beers. I would urge any home brewer who has never actually tried this to give it a go. It's a lot of fun and you can make some very different beers out of the same wort. What have you got to lose? Just give it a try. I really had a lot of fun doing this brew and organising this video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed it. This will be my last video before next year, so I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So if you did like this video, then please do go ahead and like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline for the future, so if you're interested in seeing what I've got coming up, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video or in others, or anything to do with brewing in general, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help. Until then, happy brewing!